4 years, she lived with a quiet hope that tomorrow would change everything. Every night, she whispered prayers into the darkness, asking for her life to shift, for a miracle to arrive and lift her from the weight pressing down on her chest. She believed, with all the desperation of a heart that had suffered too long, that one day the universe would notice her tears and reward her patience. Her days blurred into a cycle of waiting. She woke up each morning not with excitement, but with longing. She would scroll through her phone, seeing the lives of others who seemed to bloom effortlessly, friends who traveled the world, colleagues who earned promotions, strangers who shared stories of their overnight success. She envied them but also clung to their stories as proof. Maybe her miracle was on its way too. At work, she kept her head down, doing what was required of her but never daring to reach higher. Why try, she thought, when maybe tomorrow the miracle would appear on its own? She told herself that timing was everything, that destiny would unfold when the moment was right. But beneath that hope was an ache, a gnawing sense that she was wasting her life on pause. Her evenings were the hardest. She would sit by her window, watching city lights flicker like stars fallen to the ground. She imagined one of them was hers, waiting to be claimed, waiting to guide her. Yet the nights stretched on, and nothing changed. Family and friends offered advice. Be patient. Your time will come. She nodded, but the patience grew heavier with each passing year. Every calendar she flipped reminded her that time was moving, but she was not. The world seemed to spin forward while she stayed stuck in the same small orbit, circling the same fears, the same dreams, the same excuses. Deep down, she was afraid not of failure, but of responsibility. If she stopped waiting for a miracle, it would mean she had to take action herself. And action meant risk. Action meant rejection. Action meant facing the terrifying truth that perhaps no miracle was coming, and her life was hers alone to shape. So she waited. And waited. Until the waiting became its own prison, invisible bars that trapped her in a cycle of hoping without moving. She was alive, yes, but she was not living. And though she couldn't see it yet, the day was coming when something inside her would snap. The day she would realize that no miracle was on its way. The day she would rise, not because the universe finally gave her a gift, but because she finally gave herself permission to try. That day would change everything. The day began like every other: gray skies, lukewarm coffee, and the heavy silence of routine. She dragged herself to work, her body moving but her spirit absent. She was used to the monotony by now. But something small, almost insignificant, happened that day, and it shook her more than all the years of quiet waiting. Her manager, with little ceremony, announced that a younger colleague had been promoted. She clapped along with the rest of the team, a polite smile plastered on her face, but inside, her chest burned. That colleague had been with the company for only a fraction of the time she had. She wasn't angry at the young woman, she admired her, but she couldn't help wondering why she had been overlooked once again. On her lunch break, she sat in the stairwell, staring at her sandwich without appetite. A thought she had suppressed for years surfaced with brutal clarity: no miracle is coming for me. It was a terrifying realization. For so long, she had comforted herself with the idea that she was simply waiting for her turn, that the universe would eventually tip the scales in her favor. But the truth now loomed before her. She had been hiding behind that belief, using it as an excuse not to act. She went home that evening in silence. The city lights mocked her as she walked, each glowing lamp a reminder of people moving forward while she stood still. By the time she reached her apartment, frustration had overtaken her sadness. She dropped her bag on the floor, kicked off her shoes, and sat heavily on her couch, trembling. Tears came, not the soft tears of sorrow, but the fierce, burning tears of anger at herself. Anger for every year she had wasted waiting for someone else, something else, to deliver the life she dreamed of. Anger at the thousands of hours she had spent scrolling through other people's lives instead of creating her own. Anger at the fear that had whispered in her ear, convincing her that waiting was safer than trying. In that storm of tears, she whispered aloud for the first time. No one is coming. No miracle is coming. The words cut through her like a blade, but they also lit a spark she hadn't felt before. If no miracle was coming, then maybe, just maybe, she could stop waiting and start moving. The thought terrified her, but it also felt like freedom. For the first time in years, she considered the possibility that her future was not in the hands of fate, but in her own. That night, she didn't sleep. She lay awake, staring at the ceiling, replaying the years she had lost. But this time, instead of despair, she felt something stirring beneath her ribs, something sharp, alive, and restless. It was the beginning of resolve. The breaking point had come. And once broken, there would be no going back to who she was before. The morning after her breaking point was strangely quiet, as if the world itself was holding its breath to see what she would do. The same alarm buzzed, the same pale light crept through her curtains, and yet, something inside her was not the same. 4 years, she had woken with the weight of waiting pressing on her chest, telling herself, maybe today the miracle will come. But now, with swollen eyes and a restless heart, she whispered a different truth. No miracle is coming. It has to be me. The thought terrified her. It felt like standing at the edge of a cliff, staring into a fog so thick she couldn't see the ground. Taking responsibility meant stepping forward without knowing where she would land. But something deep within her refused to let her sit back down. She had already wasted too many years in silence, in hesitation, in wishing. That morning, her life was no longer on pause. She started small. The very first thing she did was pick up the notebook that had been gathering dust on her desk. 4 years, she had scribbled dreams in its pages, plans, goals, ideas, but they always remained dreams because she never acted on them. She flipped through those old pages now, her heart aching at how long she had carried those same wishes without daring to make them real. On the last page, she wrote a single sentence in bold, shaky letters. I will not wait. I will build. It wasn't a detailed plan. It wasn't a miracle. But it was a beginning. That single sentence gave her the courage to take one small, tangible action. She turned on her laptop and searched for opportunities, jobs, projects, courses, anything that could move her forward. At first, her old fears whispered in her ear, "You're not qualified. You're too late. Others are better." But she ignored the voices and kept clicking. For the first time, she wasn't scrolling to pass time or escape her reality, she was searching to create a new one. She applied for one small freelance job. Just one. Her hands trembled as she hit send, her mind screaming with doubt. But underneath the fear was a quiet pride. She had taken a step. She wasn't waiting anymore. That night, she couldn't stop thinking about it. It wasn't the job itself that mattered, it was the act of reaching. For the first time, she felt like she was walking instead of sitting still. And though nothing had changed on the outside, everything had changed inside her. In the following days, she repeated the process. One more application. One more email. One more risk. Each time, the fear was still there, but each time she proved to herself that she could act despite it. She didn't know if success would come, but she knew something far more important now. She was done being passive. The first step was not glamorous. No one clapped for her. No one even noticed. The world didn't shift in her favor overnight. But deep in her heart, she felt the beginning of a transformation. Because she finally understood, miracles are not delivered. They are built, one small, trembling step at a time. And though she didn't know it yet, that single choice, to stop waiting and start moving, would set her on a path that would reshape her entire life. Taking the first step had felt empowering, almost exhilarating. But soon, reality reminded her that beginnings are easy compared to the grind that follows. The world did not suddenly open its arms just because she had decided to stop waiting. Instead, it tested her, over and over again, to see if her resolve was real. Her first freelance application was rejected. Then the second. And the third. Some companies never even bothered to reply. Each rejection email hit her like a stone, threatening to rebuild the walls of doubt she had worked so hard to tear down. 4 years, she had been waiting for a miracle because deep down, she had feared this very feeling, the sting of failure when you try. And now, failure was everywhere. She would spend hours working on proposals, her heart racing with hope as she pressed send, only to wake up the next day to silence. She stayed up late researching, watching tutorials, sharpening her skills, but progress felt painfully slow. At times, she wondered if her bold declaration, "I will not wait. I will build," had been nothing more than a naive burst of courage. The old voice of doubt returned, whispering in the dark, "See? This is why you waited for a miracle. You were never strong enough to do this on your own." But this time, she didn't let the voice win so easily. She would close her eyes and remind herself of the night she broke down, the moment she realized no miracle was coming. That memory burned in her chest like fire. She couldn't go back, not now. Even if every attempt failed, at least she would fail moving forward, not sitting still. So she kept pushing. Her evenings grew lonelier as she traded social outings for study sessions, coffee dates for late-night work. She began saving small amounts of money, cutting luxuries she could no longer afford, because she believed investing in herself mattered more. Her friends didn't understand at first. Some even teased her. "You're working so hard for what? A dream? Miracles don't exist." She would laugh it off, but in her heart, she knew the truth. Miracles don't exist until we create them. Weeks turned into months. The rejections still came, but in between them, she began to see flickers of progress. A reply here. A small project there. The payments were tiny, almost laughable, but she treated them like gold. Because to her, they weren't just money, they were proof. Proof that action, no matter how small, could change her reality. And with each step, her skin grew thicker. The rejections that once shattered her now stung less. She learned from them, adjusted her approach, and tried again. Slowly, she was becoming someone new, not the woman who waited, but the woman who worked, who fought, who rose every time she stumbled. It wasn't easy. In fact, some days felt impossible. But deep down, she understood something now that she had never understood before. Waiting had been harder than this. Waiting had been suffocating. Action, even when painful, even when slow, was freedom. And that freedom was worth every struggle. Progress, even small, had begun to give her confidence. Each tiny project, each lesson learned, each new skill added to her arsenal was like a brick laid on the foundation of her new life. For the first time in years, she could look at herself in the mirror and see not just someone who dreamed, but someone who was finally building. She felt proud, even hopeful. But life has a way of testing those who dare to rise. Just when she thought her momentum was steady, a storm came to shake her foundation. It happened with the first significant opportunity she ever landed, a contract that promised not only better pay, but also the chance to prove herself on a bigger stage. She poured everything into it. Late nights, endless revisions, pushing past exhaustion with the thought, this could be the turning point. For weeks, she gave her all, believing that finally, her efforts were paying off. And then, without warning, the client vanished. No replies. No payments. No explanation. She had been scammed. The realization hit like a punch to the gut. She sat at her desk, staring at the empty inbox, the unpaid invoices, the silence where communication had once been constant. It wasn't just about the money, though she desperately needed it, it was the betrayal. She had trusted, she had believed, and she had been used. All the old doubts came flooding back, heavier than ever. This is what happens when you try. This is why you waited for a miracle. The world is too cruel. You're too weak. Stop now before you waste more years chasing what isn't meant for you. She almost listened. 4 days, she shut down. She stopped applying, stopped working, stopped writing in her notebook. She would come home, collapse on the couch, and stare blankly at the ceiling. The fire she had built felt extinguished. What was the point, she wondered, of fighting so hard if the world was only going to push her down? But then, one evening, as she sat surrounded by the silence of defeat, her eyes landed on that notebook. The words stared back at her. I will not wait. I will build. Her throat tightened. She remembered the night she wrote it, the tears, the anger, the determination. Was she really about to throw it all away because of one cruel setback? She had survived years of waiting, years of emptiness, years of silence. Compared to that, wasn't this just another test? She picked up the notebook and pressed it against her chest, whispering through clenched teeth, they can take my money. They can waste my time. But they cannot take my choice. And I choose to keep building. The setback had almost broken her. But in surviving it, she realized something profound. Setbacks were not signs to stop, they were proof that she was moving. Because only those who move can stumble. Only those who try can be tested. And if she could rise from this betrayal, she could rise from anything. The setback had nearly crushed her, but pushing through it changed something deep inside her. Before, she had been building with fragile hope, clinging to the idea that if she worked hard enough, maybe she would finally get her break. But surviving betrayal hardened her resolve. Now she wasn't just working for opportunity, she was working to prove that nothing, not rejection, not failure, not cruelty, could stop her. The weeks that followed were grueling. She rebuilt her routines, restructured her schedule, and doubled her efforts. Every morning before work, she carved out an hour for herself, an hour to study, to practice, to apply for new opportunities. Every evening, instead of collapsing in front of the television, she invested that time into her projects. Her world became smaller, quieter, but sharper in focus. And then, one day, the shift happened. An email arrived, not another rejection, not another silence, but an acceptance. A client who had seen her persistence and decided to give her a chance. The job wasn't massive, but it was fair, and more importantly, it was real. She poured herself into it, applying everything she had learned from her failures, all the discipline she had built through struggle. And this time, she delivered. When the payment cleared into her account, she sat at her kitchen table and stared at the screen, tears streaming down her face. It wasn't about the money, it was about what it represented. For years, she had begged for a miracle, prayed for life to change. And now, sitting in her modest apartment, staring at the fruit of her own effort, she realized, this was the miracle. She was the miracle. The small success ignited something powerful. Confidence. Not the fragile kind that needed constant reassurance, but the kind built brick by brick, failure by failure, choice by choice. She began landing more work, slowly building a portfolio. The rejections didn't stop, but they no longer defined her. Each no was just a stepping stone toward the next yes. Her life outside began to change too. Friends noticed her energy shifting. The same woman who once spoke with hesitation now spoke with clarity. The same woman who once avoided risks now embraced them. Even her posture was different, no longer hunched by the weight of waiting, but upright, steady, alive. And yet, she stayed humble. She didn't boast about her progress, didn't flaunt her growing success. Because she knew the journey wasn't about proving others wrong, it was about proving to herself that she had always been capable. One night, as she closed her laptop after finishing another project, she looked again at her notebook. She flipped past the old dreams and landed on the page where she had written her vow, I will not wait. I will build. This time, she added beneath it. And I am building. The turning point wasn't a loud victory or a dramatic announcement. It was a quiet, steady flame that told her she had finally crossed the threshold. She was no longer waiting for life to happen. She was creating it, one choice at a time. Momentum is a powerful thing. Once the wheel of effort begins to turn, slowly, painfully at first, it gathers strength with every push. That was her life now. What once felt like dragging stone uphill was beginning to feel like forward motion. And the more she moved, the more the world seemed to open in response. Her small projects began to multiply. One client recommended her to another. A simple opportunity led to something larger. Before long, she wasn't just scraping together work, she was building a reputation. People started to recognize her persistence, her consistency, her willingness to go above and beyond. But the most surprising part wasn't the growth of her work. It was the way her life outside of work transformed. Friends who once pitied her now sought her advice. They noticed the fire in her eyes, the quiet confidence in her voice, and they asked, how did you change? For years she had waited for a miracle that never came, but now she was becoming the proof that miracles weren't found, they were made. She began sharing little pieces of her story. Not grand speeches, not dramatic declarations, but simple truths spoken over coffee tables, in late-night phone calls, in casual conversations. She told people about the years of waiting, the breaking point, the first shaky steps, the rejections, the betrayal, and how she kept going anyway. And every time she shared, she noticed something. People leaned in. Their eyes widened. Their voices softened. Her story touched them because it was real. And soon, she realized something even greater. Her rising wasn't just lifting her. It was lighting the way for others who were still waiting, still hoping, still stuck where she had once been. At work, she was no longer invisible. The same colleagues who had passed her by now respected her discipline, her growth, her courage. Outside of work, she was receiving opportunities she had never imagined before, collaborations, invitations, projects that once felt impossible. Her notebook, once filled with desperate dreams, was now crowded with plans and deadlines and goals she was actively pursuing. The woman who once sat by the window at night, staring at city lights with longing, now stood tall among them. She no longer asked, "When will my miracle come?" Instead, she asked, "What will I create next?" And perhaps the most beautiful part was this: she was no longer chasing validation. She wasn't doing it to prove her worth to anyone else. She wasn't racing against time or competing with the lives she once compared herself to online. She was rising for herself, for the woman who had suffered, for the woman who had almost given up, for the woman who had once believed she wasn't strong enough. This rise was hers. And though she had already come so far, she knew now that this was only the beginning. The miracle wasn't in what she had gained, it was in who she had become. Her life was no longer defined by waiting, it was defined by building, by choosing, by becoming. The woman who once sat paralyzed in her apartment, whispering prayers for rescue, had been replaced by someone unrecognizable. She was still the same person, with the same scars and memories, but her spirit had transformed. She no longer looked at her struggles as curses. Now, she saw them as training. Every rejection, every betrayal, every tear-stained night had shaped her into someone stronger, sharper, more determined. Her mornings began with energy rather than dread. She no longer dragged herself out of bed to face another cycle of monotony. Instead, she rose with intention, with clarity, with purpose. She created routines that nurtured her growth, journaling her goals, planning her days, carving out time for both learning and rest. The discipline that once felt like a burden had become her anchor. Even her environment reflected her transformation. She cleaned her small apartment, decorating it with reminders of her journey. Quotes on the wall. A vision board above her desk. The notebook, her sacred notebook, now filled with crossed-off goals and new plans. Her space, once heavy with the silence of waiting, now pulsed with life, like a garden finally watered. But the deepest transformation was in her mind. Where once there had been doubt, there was now belief. Where once there had been fear, there was now courage. She no longer asked, "Can I do this?" Instead, she asked, "How will I do this?" And when problems arose, as they always did, she met them not with panic, but with patience. She had endured worse. She had survived worse. Nothing could break her now. Her relationships also began to shift. Some friends drifted away, unable to understand the changes in her. But others grew closer, inspired by her resilience. New connections entered her life, people who shared her hunger for growth, people who lifted her rather than held her back. She realized, perhaps for the first time, that transformation is contagious. By changing herself, she was changing the world around her. And in her heart, a bigger vision began to take root. She no longer wanted just to survive or even succeed for herself. She wanted to help others, the ones still trapped in waiting, the ones still begging for miracles. She remembered the pain of that prison, the endless nights of wishing for life to change, and she knew her story could be the key to someone else's freedom. This was no longer just about her. This was about becoming a living reminder that miracles are not found, they are forged. As she stood one evening at her window, the same window where she once felt like a prisoner of waiting, she smiled at the city lights. They no longer mocked her. They no longer reminded her of everything she lacked. Now, they mirrored her own glow. She whispered into the night, not as a plea, but as a promise. "I will never wait again. I will create. I will rise. I will transform." And with that vow, she stepped fully into her new identity, not the woman who waited for miracles, but the woman who became one. For years, she lived with a quiet hope that tomorrow would change everything. Every night, She whispered prayers into the darkness, asking for her life to shift, for a miracle to arrive and lift her from the weight pressing down on her chest. She believed, with all the desperation of a heart that had suffered too long, that one day the universe would notice her tears and reward her patience. Her days blurred into a cycle of waiting. She woke up each morning not with excitement, but with longing. She would scroll through her phone, seeing the lives of others who seemed to bloom effortlessly, friends who traveled the world, colleagues who earned promotions, strangers who shared stories of their overnight success. She envied them but also clung to their stories as proof. Maybe her miracle was on its way too. At work, she kept her head down, doing what was required of her but never daring to reach higher. Why try, she thought, when maybe tomorrow the miracle would appear on its own? She told herself that timing was everything, that destiny would unfold when the moment was right. But beneath that hope was an ache, a gnawing sense that she was wasting her life on pause. Her evenings were the hardest. She would sit by her window, watching city lights flicker like stars fallen to the ground. She imagined one of them was hers, waiting to be claimed, waiting to guide her. Yet the nights stretched on, and nothing changed. Family and friends offered advice. Be patient. Your time will come. She nodded, but the patience grew heavier with each passing year. Every calendar she flipped reminded her that time was moving, but she was not. The world seemed to spin forward while she stayed stuck in the same small orbit, circling the same fears, the same dreams, the same excuses. Deep down, she was afraid not of failure, but of responsibility. If she stopped waiting for a miracle, it would mean she had to take action herself. And action meant risk. Action meant rejection. Action meant facing the terrifying truth that perhaps no miracle was coming, and her life was hers alone to shape. So she waited. And waited. Until the waiting became its own prison, invisible bars that trapped her in a cycle of hoping without moving. She was alive, yes, but she was not living. And though she couldn't see it yet, the day was coming when something inside her would snap. The day she would realize that no miracle was on its way. The day she would rise, not because the universe finally gave her a gift, but because she finally gave herself permission to try. That day would change everything. Her transformation did not stay hidden. Change, when real, cannot be contained. It radiates, it spills into the lives of those around us, it plants seeds in places we never expect. The woman who once blended into the background was now someone others noticed. Not because she flaunted her progress, but because she carried herself with a quiet strength that people couldn't ignore. At work, colleagues who had once dismissed her now sought her guidance. They noticed her work ethic, her calm under pressure, her ability to push through setbacks without breaking. When they complained about problems, she didn't feed the negativity, she offered solutions, or at least encouragement. She had gone from invisible to influential, not by chasing approval, but by becoming undeniable. Outside of work, her impact grew even more. Friends who had once told her to just be patient began calling her late at night, confessing their own struggles and doubts. And she listened, really listened, not as someone who had all the answers, but as someone who understood what it felt like to be stuck in waiting. She shared her story not as a lecture, but as a mirror, showing them what was possible. Slowly, people around her began to take their own first steps. A friend applied for a job she had been too afraid to try for. Another started a side project she had always dreamed of. And when they told her about their small victories, they always said the same thing: "Watching you made me believe I could try too." Her notebook, once a place for her own desperate scribbles, now contained notes of encouragement she planned to share with others. She began writing down lessons she had learned the hard way, truths about failure, about persistence, about the power of action over waiting. She didn't know it yet, but those notes would one day become the seeds of something much bigger. The most powerful change, however, wasn't in what others said or did. It was in what she saw. She saw hope where she once saw despair. She saw strength in people who believed they were weak. She saw potential in those who thought they were too late. Her eyes, once clouded by longing for a miracle, now looked for sparks, the sparks she knew lived in everyone, waiting to be lit. And with every life she touched, she felt her own purpose expanding. She wasn't just building a career or a future anymore, she was building a legacy. A legacy that whispered to every silent struggler, You don't need to wait for a miracle. You are already enough. Start where you are. Begin now. For the first time, she understood something deeper than success. The true miracle was not that she had risen, it was that her rising had lifted others with her. And this, she realized, was only the beginning of her impact. Years had passed since that night when she sat alone, broken, whispering through tears that no miracle was coming. Back then, she had thought her world was ending. Now, looking back, she realized it had only just begun. That breaking point had been her awakening, the night she stopped waiting for life to rescue her and chose, instead, to rescue herself. She often thought about the woman she used to be. The one who scrolled endlessly through other people's successes, who prayed for change but never moved, who whispered dreams into notebooks but never dared to make them real. She didn't hate that woman. No, she honored her. Because without her, there would be no journey. Without her pain, there would be no growth. Without her long years of waiting, there would be no fire burning now. Her life was unrecognizable. The small projects she once celebrated had grown into bigger ventures, bigger opportunities, even bigger responsibilities. She had built a career, yes, but more importantly, she had built herself. Her voice, once shaky and unsure, now carried weight. Her choices, once avoided out of fear, now shaped her future with intention. She was no longer the woman who waited for a miracle, she was the miracle, in flesh and blood. But what filled her heart most was not the success, not the recognition, not even the independence she had carved for herself. What filled her heart was the people. The ones who told her, because of you, I tried. The ones who whispered, your story gave me courage. The ones who stopped waiting because they saw her rise and believed they could too. She had learned that the true purpose of rising is not to stand taller than others, but to reach back and lift them with you. And so, she gave her time, her story, her encouragement. She became a mentor, a guide, a light for those still trapped in the prison of waiting. Every time she saw someone take their first trembling step, she felt the same joy she had felt when she first wrote the words in her notebook, I will not wait. I will build. One evening, she found herself again by her window, the same window where her journey had begun. But this time, she did not look at the city lights with longing. She looked at them with gratitude. Each light reminded her of a lesson, a setback, a victory, a person she had touched. The city had not changed. But she had. And in changing herself, she had changed her world. She closed her eyes and whispered not a plea, not a prayer, but a promise. I will never wait again. My life is my miracle. And with that, she smiled. Because she knew her story wasn't ending. It was continuing, with every step she took, with every life she touched, with every dream she built from the ground up. Her legacy was not that she stopped waiting. Her legacy was that she showed the world that no one ever has to wait again.